about the Mets, shall we? Jack, Aram, new week, Just Baseball Show, Monday, December 12th. This is the penultimate week before Christmas. Is it okay to play the Michael Bublé and the John Legend right now? Do you listen to it in the car? I know you just went to Rockefeller Center.
Okay, that was obligatory. Family in town have to do the whole tourist game and do all those things. I haven't been there at all. It was nice, but like, dude, I'm not a big Christmas soundtrack guy. Like, and of course, I know it's like an on-brand Aram take to have. Yeah,
Aram Scrooge.
I'm Scrooge. I'm the worst. I just don't enjoy the music. Like, it's just kind of brutal. I hear it all the time. Yeah. I like it if I'm like at Rockefeller Center for that span of 20 minutes. Then like, I don't need it everywhere I go for the rest of the next few weeks.
Yes. So I'm with you. Like, I don't need to hear the 60th rendition of the same song, but Mariah Carey, like, that is the immediate good vibe song. Like, are you anti Mariah Carey? Or
no, I'm okay with it. I just got to really be in the mood. And I'm rarely like, I'm in the middle of like a shopping or whatever, like focused on getting a gift or something. And just like, it just follows you everywhere you go.
How stressful are gifts for you?
Most of the time, just forget about them.
I hate them. I can't stand gift shopping.
In the mail, I always say, "Oh, it's in the mail," and then I order it like after Christmas and just have it straight to somebody's store.
Yeah,
not big on the gifts.
on that post-Christmas sale. That's big. All right, we're going to talk about the Mets today. We've got the managing editor Ryan Finkelstein, also the host of Locked On Mets. He is what I believe to be the Mets source, the Mets go-to, right, for news and fun opinion, because the guy kicks ass. So we're gonna have him on to talk big picture. We're gonna treat this as like the Mets GM episode. We promised you a GM episode for all 30 teams. The Mets are pretty much done, so we're just gonna go through that rapid fire, Aram and I. But I do want to start with this like loaded question that I think everybody's asking right now. And I'm just going to throw it to you and see whichever way you go with it. Is what Steve Cohen is doing good for baseball?
Is what Steve Cohen is doing good for baseball? Yeah, I guess. Right. I mean, I think I would rather have what Steve Cohen is doing be done than a bunch of small market teams pretend to spend, like whatever the Marlins did last season being the example of that, right? Like they sign Ivy Garcia, they sign Jorge Soler, they commit $80 million to those two guys, and they have their hands tied behind their back for the next 5 years and say, hey, we tried.
Or how about what the White Sox are doing right now, right? Where they keep saying like, oh, we're going to get better, and then nothing happens.
So, yeah, exactly. So I would say, I think it's good. It's misconstrued as bad because it further highlights the bad that's actually being done, which is the small market teams not paying, to really boost that payroll whatsoever. I think what Steve Cohen is doing is creating more polarization, but it's always good when an owner spends, right? It's always good when an owner is not just focused on profits and actually reinvest into the product that he is putting on the field. It's going to be good for baseball in New York, which means it's good for baseball, period. The reason why we have this question of, is it good? Is it because it creates the biggest gap possible between the bad, which is the teams that just profit off of the revenue sharing and do all of the things that we hate, which are a big part of why we, have seen the lockout, and everything that happened already. Steve Cohen's kind of flashing an even bigger, light on that right now. And I think he's getting some collateral damage, which I don't think is fair. He's doing what, every fan and every team would want their owner to do. It just happens to be that 29 other teams and 29 other fan bases aren't seeing their owner really do it to this degree. And I'd say only a few others are even seeing something close to this.
And the beauty of what he is doing, like, it is entirely legal in the sport of baseball. He is operating within the parameters of what baseball has set, because they've set no parameters. Like, all it is if you go over this number, you pay this much. And he's willing to pay that much, and he's willing to pay that escalated cost here. I was talking to your friend and mine, James Fox and Mike Rankin, on Future Sox earlier today, and they kind of asked the same thing, and that got my gears turning. And I'm gonna ask Fink that when he comes on. I wanted to ask you that.
Fink's answer will be even more clear cut than mine.
I'm gonna ask him to do this thing where like he tries to remove himself from the Mets thing, and I'll say,
no, he's pretty good at that. He's pretty good at that.
He is good at that, right? So I'm gonna ask him to do that. And my answer was very similar to you in that it was like your high school English teacher answer. It was a little bit of both. It is good and it's bad. And the bad was it is further highlighting the power imbalance in baseball. Exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
And you're going to hate me, but I'm going to make a soccer comp right now because a lot of people are watching the World Cup. The 4 semifinalists right now: Argentina, Croatia, Morocco, and France. The best player on Argentina is Lionel Messi. He plays for Paris Saint-Germain, PSG. Best player on France, Kylian Mbappe. He plays for PSG. Best player on Morocco, Achraf Hakimi, plays for PSG. And then you look at Croatia, like, you know, a bunch of Croatian guys, but the captain, the guy that's been there forever, the most notable name, Luka Modric, he plays for Real Madrid. Kylian Mbappe has been rumored to go to Real Madrid. Achraf Hakimi started at Real Madrid. Like, there are 5 teams in soccer that have all of the best players. And soccer and FIFA, granted, FIFA is way more corrupt than Major League Baseball will ever be, but that's the comparison when you talk about the lack of cap and the lack of floor, right? It's everybody's got liberty to do whatever the hell they want. And what the Mets are doing, what Steve Cohen is doing, is very FIFA-esque, where if you have the funds, you can take in and ingest a lot of the top talent in baseball.
Yeah.
Now,
I was sorry to cut you off. I was gonna say, but the French league seems to be doing great. You know, like the Premier League seems to be doing great. Real Madrid, you know, like the Spanish league seems to be doing great, even with some of that polarization.
Exactly. And like, you've got teams that, you know, will never compete for a title, but like when Leicester City's good and they're like, you know, plus 16,000 to win the Premier League title, that's great. That's the underdog story. I mean,
you just don't want baseball being like that.
You don't want baseball being like that, but you can get better in other ways. We've seen Tampa and Oakland do it with development, and Cleveland do it with development. Now, that's the bad. The good is you've got a guy that like so badly wants his favorite team to win baseball games that he's willing to pay money to do it, and he's not breaking any rules. So don't you wish your owner was like that? So I think it's the Mets have Steve Cohen, and the other 29 fan bases are envious that they don't have Steve Cohen.
Correct. And like at the end of the day, I'll take this, you know, over kind of what we're seeing in with some of these other organizations. And you'll get Bruce Sherman with the Marlins. And I know it's something that's been discussed a lot in the Marlins circles, and fans just frustrated the Marlins haven't done anything yet. I mean, what are you expecting them to do? Right. And you look at what the CBT or whatever they call it, what the tax that Cohen's going to be hit with is $400 million roughly is what it's anticipated to be. Bruce Sherman, the Marlins, you know, owner, is barely worth more than that. So, you know, you got to look at who's coming into this sport at this point too, right? And some of the people that are able to buy some of these lower end Major League Baseball franchises could never sniff the NFL, right? They could never. Bruce Sherman could never buy an NFL team. Bruce Sherman could never buy a top market MLB team. I don't know. I feel weird. I don't know what the qualifications are. I don't know what the legal, you know, impact is on this, but I do think you have to be a certain level of rich to buy any Major League Baseball team, even if they're the Miami Marlins, right? Even if it's the freaking Miami Marlins who stink. Like, you can't be Bruce Sherman, who I know we joke like Bob Castellini's broke with the Reds. Like, that's the joke too. Like, those guys, though, the franchise is worth a lot more than anything that they really have. So I don't know if it should ever be that way. You need proof of funds to like tour certain homes in real estate. Like, you can't just go, you know, visit that $20 million home. I feel like there should be like a certain level of proof of funds to even be in the realm of consideration for a franchise instead of these broke boys like Bruce Sherman and Bob Castellini.
I like that proof of income, right? 3 times market rent. If you're, you know, looking at an apartment, or you need like a guarantor or something like that. So
yes,
it's either you yourself are rich enough to be competitive, or you need to grab 3 of your closest rich buddies and you guys can combine to create one mega, somewhat competitive person. So I kind of love that, but I never see this rule changing. Now that I think about it, I don't think we will ever see a salary cap and salary floor in Major League Baseball, just because it doesn't seem realistic at this point.
No, I don't think so. I think the only thing we'll really see is more strict taxes, you know, and they already added that. That was already put in. Yeah. The provision was like basically they were calling it the Steve Cohen tax because owners knew that this was coming. It would have been worse. So, I think they'll make it a little bit stricter, but at the end of the day, look, he's not going to spend that much more. Like it's still going to be, I think, close enough where it's not that much further off from the Dodgers and some of these other teams.
Right. I'm with you. Before we get to like rapid fire GM with the New York Mets, you've got some thoughts on the Kevin Kiermaier Toronto fit that came in. Did the exact contract details come out? It took a couple hours. I did not see it immediately.
I'm sure they have by now, right? It was so the full breakdown is actually I don't see anything on Spot Track.
I don't see anything.
So whatever the deal is, I'll assume it's nothing that is really, extremely expensive here for Kevin Kiermaier, even though in this market, you never know. But what I will say is as long as it's less than 15 million, which I assume it is, should be just fine. I really like this fit because, we know they've been looking for that lefty bat and this is not the most exciting lefty bat. And they need probably a better lefty bat, but what he's going to give them in the outfield, a team that was net negative defensively in the outfield in terms of value, -3 outs above average, put him in the bottom half of the league. Not terrible, but not good. But also getting George Springer off his legs a little bit in center field. You don't need him out there every day. A guy that struggled to stay healthy, a guy that I think will benefit from that offensively as well. So you're able to kind of get George Springer some more, time at the DH position, not always in center field. You get a better defensive player in Kevin Kiermaier. And I think people say like, oh, his best days are behind him. Maybe, but I still think this guy can play really high level of center field. And he's the type of player that as long as he's an average runner, he will always be a good defender. It's once his legs are shot is when he won't be a good defender out there. So whatever he is better than Raimel Tapia offensively. They get a big boost defensively. And I think George Springer is going to benefit from this as well. Kind of like when we saw before Adam Duvall got hurt, when he moved off of center because they called up Michael Harris. Duvall started to hit a lot better too with the Braves. And, I'm very interested to see how this works for the Blue Jays, but, I thought for the lower profile signings that people will ignore, I thought he was a perfect fit for them.
I think so too. And I like that you bring up Tapia because this felt like Ross Atkins was just looking to tap the upgrade button on Raimel Tapia. Yeah. And that's exactly what he did with Kiermaier because Tapia is not the defender that Kiermaier is and still is. Kiermaier adds this level of like maybe a teensy bit of pop, and like Tapia had none of that. Tapia was put it on the ground and see if you can outrun the shortstop. And in Major League Baseball, you cannot do that, and you will never do that. And that's why Billy Hamilton has been bouncing team by team because you cannot outrun a Major League shortstop or a Major League third baseman. So Kiermaier is an upgrade defensively and a chance for more offensively. Now, I'm looking at roster resource right now on Fangraphs, and this lineup looks good. It looks really good for Toronto. But then you go to the bench, and I see Santiago Espinal. Granted, they're not factoring in Gabby Moreno at this moment, but I see Santiago Espinal, good. Kevin Biggio, would like not to use Kevin Biggio. Nathan Lukes would like not to use Nathan Lukes, and Spencer Horwitz would like not to use Spencer Horwitz. So there's more work to be done in Toronto, it seems.
Correction. I would like to use Spencer Horwitz.
But
everybody else, I agree. I think he rakes. I really do think he rakes. But everybody else, I'm with you. I really do believe in Spencer Horwitz. This guy can swing it. Everybody else, I agree. They need to add some pieces to the bench. But Gabby Moreno can play multiple spots. I still think they need to trade one of those catchers. We'll do the Blue Jays episode. But I'm excited for the Jays episode because they're really good. They still got more work to do. And it's going to be very fun to see, what kind of moves they make.
Cool. Peter and I already talked about Nimmo on Friday. Quick thoughts on Senga, and then we go rapid fire through the lineup, the rotation, the bench, see what needs to improve. Senga, it was 5 years, 75. That is cheaper per AAV than Taiwan Walker with the Phillies, and it is cheaper by overall value than Masataka Yoshida with the Red Sox. And we thought that Senga was the more valuable guy coming over from Nippon Professional Baseball than Yoshida was. I really like this deal.
We don't have the full breakdown on this one, right?
I thought it was 5 for 75 with an opt-out
but we don't know
2.
Opt out after year 2 or 3. I've seen mixing things. This is another one where we don't have the the exact details of it. What I will say is the opt-out, makes the deal look a little bit less of a steal, but it's still a phenomenal deal. Go fill it in real quick.
Yeah, so I see full no trade the entire time. 15 million in 23, 24, 25, player option ahead of 2026, and a player option ahead of 2027.
Okay. So if you look at it like 3 years, 45 million basically is what they're saying it is.
3 for 45 with 2 opt-outs.
So, the only thing I would say is Senga gets himself some security on the back end, because let's say this guy stinks. He could just cash his checks for 5-6 years. And for the good faith, the Mets get a pretty good discount on the front end, right? I mean, they're 15 AAV in this market is ridiculously cheap. Like what we're going to see Chris Bassett get is going to be most likely more substantial than that AAV wise. He reportedly wants a 4th year. Even if he gets 3 years, it's going to be, more than 15 million per season. I'd way rather roll the dice on Kodai Senga. And here's the thing. We don't know how these guys are always going to translate. What I can tell you is what we've talked about in previous episodes. I can tell you what the stuff looks like. It's a splitter that is going to give big league hitters fits from day one. It's going to be a plus big league pitch. It's a fastball that can touch triple digits that sits at 96 miles an hour. And there's guys with both of those pitches that get shelled. So Casey Mize was supposed to be that right off the bat. So, right. But he's also got a slider in the low 80s that he manipulates to a cutter in the upper 80s that'll run it on the hands of lefties and tie them up. Like, this guy has a pretty unique arsenal. He's not like most of these other players that are just, a lot of the guys that come from Japan or come over that are similar profile. It's just fastball splitter. And they don't really have that third pitch that you can really trust. The breaking ball doesn't quite have the shape that you're hoping for. I don't think that's the case with Senga. So I love this signing. I think this is one of the best signings of the offseason so far. And this wasn't just, Uncle Steve shelling out the dough. This was a smart and really well-structured contract that I think sets the Mets up for success, gives them a little bit more spending ability, even though they don't really need that much breathing room. But I'm sure they'd like to stay as low as they can above the tax. And I mean, this guy could be a legit number 3 right off the bat. I think it's very possible, and it can be even better than that potentially.
So even if the stuff is a subdued version of what you described, at 15 million, he's making 1.75 less than Miles Michaelis, who's making 16.8 this year. Blake Snell is making 16.6. Jose Barrios is making 15.7, and I want to bounce back from Barrios, but Charlie Blackmon is making 15.3. German Marquez is making 15.3. Luis Severino is making 15.
Andrew Heaney is making 12 and change, 12 and a half.
Eduardo Rodriguez and Kyle Hendricks are making 14. Carlos Carrasco is making 14. I will absolutely, in this market, pay 15 for that stuff. And I also just want to shout out Billy Epler, because he may be the biggest Robin in baseball right now, because whenever we see a contract come through, it's, shout out Steve Cohen. And it's obviously coming from him, but it feels like Billy Epler is making a lot of smart decisions.
Hey, it's funny. You would think that Steve Cohen owned the Padres with the way that AJ Preller is throwing out these deals, right? Reported 14-year deal for Aaron Judge, who would be playing until he's 45 at that point. Like, Preller is being reckless. The Mets are actually being a little bit more strategic. We talk about letting, a DeGrom walk, letting Taijuan Walker go to their rival at 4 years, $72 million. I'll pack his bags for him and send him to Philly if I'm New York. And that's not a slight at Taijuan, but that's a lot of money. And that's another example, right? 18 million AAV for 4 years or 15 million AAV for 3 years on Kodai Senga, even with the player options and the no trade clause. No brainer, absolute no brainer. So, that's why the Mets were okay letting Walker walk, because they're able to replace him with Senga, who's cheaper and younger, and I think way more upside. A pretty good spot for the Mets to be in. It seems like for their subtractions, they got more value with the additions to replace those guys. I think they ended up replacing some guys and gaining a little bit production. When you look at what they did with Verlander and now Senga with those 2 signings, I really like what they've done.
100% mi amigo. Now let's go rapid fire here. Rotation, bullpen, and then we'll go lineup, then bench, and we'll tell you if and where the Mets need to improve. Starting rotation: Verlander, Scherzer, Senga, Quintana, Carlos Carrasco.
That could be one of the best in baseball. I mean, If Jose Quintana, I think he's the big X factor here, which is crazy because I think Kodai Senga, like, theoretically is the X factor because his variance is 5 to potentially 1, not in this rotation, but in terms of his ability, I think, both are very unlikely. I can't even sell you on that kind of variance on Cookie Carrasco or Jose Quintana, right? But when I look at what Quintana did last year, and like if Quintana falls off, like he's not even usable, right? Like he's back to whatever he was before. Right, I don't think that's going to happen because he did really reinvent himself in the way he was locating his pitch usage and all those different things. But if Quintana is what he was last year, which was one of the best lefties in baseball for the duration of the season, this rotation's ridiculous, right? The guy you're looking forward to would theoretically be Cookie Carrasco, who, when he's on, I mean, Carrasco's still a really good arm. And last year he was, sub 4 ERA guy. Underlying stats were even better.
Have we, like, nobody's talking about Tyler McGill either. Like, Tyler McGill is still fully in the fold here, right? And isn't Lucchesi fully in the fold here too?
Eliezer Hernandez is an insurance policy for them too.
They've got depth out the ass.
Yeah.
It's impressive. All right. So taken care of on the starting rotation front. Bullpen. Edwin Diaz is your closer for the long term now. They signed David Robertson, 1 year, $10 million. Then you got Brooks Raley, who was a nice pickup from Tampa. Drew Smith, David Peterson, John Curtis, Zach Green. You mentioned Eliezer. How about Bryce Montez de Oca? How about Steven Ridings? They've got depth. There's no need to add, I don't think.
Yeah, I like the Zach Green pickup in the Rule 5. Another, rivalry Rule 5 snatch, which is fun. We talk about Whitlock from, the Yankees to the Red Sox now. The Yankees have a lot of arms. They develop bullpen arms with the best of them. So you can steal some good ones from the Yanks. I like Zach Green in that pickup. Drew Smith looked really good in spots last year. David Robertson, I think, is the really big pickup here because we saw somebody like Chris Martin, get 2 years of, what was it? What was the breakdown there? It was 2 years.
17 and a half.
Something like that, but it was a 2-year deal, right? David Robertson, 1 year, a little bit more expensive at 10 mil, but you don't have to commit the multiple years to a late 30s guy. You get Robertson on a 1 year where if he's anything close to last year, you've got one of the better setup men that you could want. This guy had 20 saves and was nails at points in the postseason. They add Raley, like you said, is an underrated trade. I mean, that guy had 6 saves of his own and also had a 2.68 last year. Like, now they have 3 guys that are capable of closing games out. Of course, you want Diaz closing every game out, but you want to have other guys that are capable of being able to, shut the door. And I think they've got 2 other guys that can do that. And I think a couple guys that aren't far off from being able to do that too. Bullpen is, I think, pretty much solidified.
Yeah, I think so too. Like maybe a 1 year.
They got the vet.
Deal. Yeah. No need.
Yeah. Raley's like a low key vet in some ways, even though he came over from after being in the big leagues, went to the KBO and then back to the big leagues. Like he's been around the block. I'd consider that guy a bullpen vet. I think they've got their experienced guys that can balance it with some youngsters. And what's crazy is David Peterson, like, I guess he's coming out of that bullpen, right? And I think he can be tough on lefties and, be that middle relief guy. But if that's a guy that if he's spot starting for you, his stuff ticked up a little bit last year. He looked pretty darn good. He just turned 27 years old.
Feel great about that. All right, lineup. Nimmo in center for the long term. Great. An aging 34-year-old Starling Marte. He's still Starling Marte, and he hasn't showed much aging. He just has to stay on the field. Great. Francisco Lindor at short. Pete Alonso at first. Jeff McNeil at second. Mark Canha, 33-year-old, going to be 34 on opening day, in left. Daniel Vogelbach and Darren Ruff are probably the DH platoon. Yeah. Then you've got Eduardo Escobar at third and somebody catching. And I feel like that's kind of where we need to stick.
Yeah, like this is, like we said, this is gonna be a little bit of a different GM episode because this team is pretty far along here, and they've made a lot of the big moves. But I do look at first base taken care of. Pete Alonso's there, and his defense has gotten so much better. You can keep him there for most of the time, aside from the occasional day off. But left field, I love Mark Canha, but that is a spot where you could be upgrading, especially in a position where power is important. I'm not saying move off of Mark Canha, but when you look at a corner outfield spot and the DH spot kind of being a little bit lighter in the production department. Vogelbach is great against righties. I'm not a believer in platoon DHs though, when you can't play anywhere in the field and Vogelbach basically can only play first and it's not great first base.
Yeah.
I do wonder, but I know they also don't want to block top prospect Francisco Alvarez, who, should be big league ready at some point, but I think they also shouldn't count on him coming up. So I think they need to really ask themselves here, what are they trying to do? And like we talked about, I look at them as a 2-year window and then they're reassessing. And I think a lot of their contractual commitments back that up, Jack, as we've highlighted. So if they're looking at trying to win it in this 2-year window right now, I'm not really worried about blocking anybody. I think Brett Beatty's going to factor in, whether it's at third base from Eduardo Escobar or, filling in at the DH spot. So maybe that's part of the reason why. And I think Beatty could contribute immediately. He could also play some left. So they might have their internal options here. They might want to leave themselves a little bit of, flexibility to mix and match. But I do look at the DH in the left field spot and I'm like, that is somewhere where if you're trying to be, the best team in baseball, which they're clearly trying to do at a $400 million, tax hit, you could probably do a little bit better there.
Yes. You also didn't mention Vientos, and Vientos could factor in as well, right? Like you've got Beatty, who is a lefty bat that has shown a ton of promise. You've got Vientos, who is a bit more volatile, but obviously has this crazy juice from the right side. So I feel like giving each of those guys opportunities in the first couple of months of the season could be beneficial. But again, like you're saying, they're trying to be the best team in baseball. So you're not looking to reassess after you give Beatty and Vientos opportunities. You're looking to try and win 110 games.
Exactly. And if these guys come up and they struggle now, you're trying to package Vientos and send him elsewhere, but he just hit 180 through the first 150 plate appearances. Yeah. Now you're a little stuck. So I am very interested to see how they handle it, because you look at the free agent market, who's left. There's not that many guys that you could point to and say, oh, that's a clear-cut upgrade. Like, would I love to see them try JD Martinez at the DH spot? Sure. Yeah. But if he doesn't hit the way, you're hoping, now you've got another guy kind of clunking things up with, not much positional versatility. And like Vogelbach, they're kind of splitting times at the DH. With how light the bench is, I wouldn't hate that. But yeah, I guess the question is, do they need to upgrade this, or are there internal options enough between Alvarez, Vientos, and, they did trade for Darren Ruff, who was hurt all last year. The assumption is that Ruff, with a neck injury and dealing with other stuff, will be better this year. The way Ruff crushes lefties, Vogelbach crushes righties. If that's your contingency plan, if the prospects don't pan out, that's not the worst thing in the world, especially with the way the rest of this lineup looks.
No, I mean, my final thought on the Mets is I believe they are a finished product right now.
I just have the same concern that I had last year, which was, is there enough slug outside of Pete Alonso? It's so hard to string together hits in today's game. And outside of Pete Alonso, you don't have one guy who hit 30 home runs. The next most was Lindor with 26, which is good. Is there enough slug with Nimmo, Marte, McNeil, Canna, Escobar? I love the contact-oriented approach. I love having a lineup like that. But if you have a lineup like that, I just feel like you got to have one more of those 30-plus home run threats alongside Pete Alonso. And I don't know if they have that guy right now, but maybe the platoon of Vogelbach and Ruff can give you, which it almost did give you 30 last year. And they both, especially Ruff, didn't play to the best of their ability. So maybe that's how they look at it. And that worked for the Giants. So, in 2021. So maybe I just think there needs to be a little bit more slug.
Don't kill me for throwing this name out. How's the fit between the Mets and Joey Gallo?
I don't think it's bad, man.
I don't think it's bad. Like, we know he can play a good defensive outfield. We know that already about Joey Gallo. I think that's a very underrated part of his game. Obviously, all anybody wants to talk about is the fact that he might hit 115, but the shift change, he can't get worse in the batting average department. We know he has 30, 40, hell, 50 homer potential if everything is okay. and we know he's going to provide pretty good outfield defense. Like, I think that's a good fit. And obviously he's not going to cost much because he's hit rock bottom in his career.
And he's obviously not going to play every day. So when people are like, "Oh no, Gallo," you're scarred from Joey Gallo because the Yankees were trotting him out there every single game because they had to. They gave up a haul for him, and he was struggling every single game. Yeah. When you look at what he would be for you now, I look at their outfield. It's still going to be, if you sign a Joey Gallo, it's still going to be Starling Marte. It's still going to be Mark Canha, and it's still going to be Brandon Nimmo. But here's the thing. You have Starling Marte, who continues to get hurt and is going to need those days off, every week or so, which you're going to get some Gallo starts there. You also have a Mark Canha who gets hurt and is going to need some days off here and there. And you can also, bring him in here against, a weaker throwing righty. You have Canha for all the lefties. You have Marte for all the lefties. But just looking at it from that perspective, like, no one's expecting Joey Gallo to be an everyday player anymore. I don't think. Like, he's going to be a platoon guy at best. If he's your fourth outfielder, so to speak, it's not the worst thing.
We're going to find out in about half an hour. But what do you think Fink says if I bring up the name Joey Gallo? Do you think he vomits?
Yes, I think he'll be furious.
We'll see.